Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. We are going to be talking about Shiren the Wanderer today, and specifically the newest one which has just landed on the Nintendo Switch, Shiren the Wanderer, the Tower of Fortune and the Dice of Fate, which is a very long name for what is actually a very good game. It's not really a new game, it was actually a port of the PlayStation Vita original, but the Vita game was excellent. Perhaps not as many people played that as probably should, because it was not a console that sold a lot of copies, and hopefully people discover the Switch version of it now for the first time, because like I said, it is a very good game. I do enjoy it a great deal. You can check out my review on digitallydownloaded.net, in which I go pretty in depth with my thoughts. What I want to do with this video is talk more about the mystery dungeon genre and the roguelike as a whole, because roguelikes have become a really overused, oversaturated term, and in many ways I now get quite turned off when I hear a developer describe their game as a roguelike, simply because it doesn't mean as much as it used to, and it's certainly become, like I said, overused and perhaps exhausting to the audience. But Shiren the Wanderer is an example of what a roguelike should be, mostly because it is quite traditional to what the mystery dungeon genre really pioneered. So to give you a little bit of a history lesson first, for people who are perhaps not so familiar with the roguelike genre, or haven't played too many games in the series, or haven't really thought about where the title comes from, roguelike comes from a game called Rogue, funnily enough, which is a very old game now. It was originally released way back in 1980, and back then it was one of the first examples of the RPG genre, and it was so primitive that there was no real graphics in the thing. Everything was represented by ASCII keys. So your character was represented with the @ key, as in the @ that you use when you write an email address down. The monsters that would attack you would be simple characters, K, L, Z, I, whatever. And the floors that you would explore, the ground, was represented by simple dots. And that was basically it. What made it so compelling is that every time that you played, it was randomized in terms of the levels, the level design themselves, the monsters that you'd fight, and the loot that you would get. Sometimes you would find yourself stuck in Rogue, and you would be headed to a very quick death because the dice rolls as such went against you. But other times you'd get yourself into a roll, and it was really compelling to try and beat the randomization odds and just progress further each time that you played. The complete unknown that you would not be able to know what you're up against before you started to play became a really defining characteristic of Rogue, and has made it really popular through the years. In fact, it is so popular that you can still buy it today. Well, not even buy it, you can still download and play it today. It was just released on Steam about 2 weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure it's free, so that goes to show how popular and enduring it is. 40 years later, there is still an audience for the game, and they still felt it was worth putting out there for people to play. And so Rogue was popular enough to inspire a whole bunch of other developers to play around with the idea of procedural generation or randomized elements in their games being the core mechanic, and to engage with the game you had to engage with the random elements, the roguelike as such. That's where the title comes from. One of the earlier examples of that was a game called Torneko's Great Adventure, which was a crossover game from Dragon Quest, one of the more iconic and popular characters from the early era of Dragon Quest, was given his own adventure where he had to go through these random dungeons, collect loot, defeat enemies, and so on and so forth. That would be the first mystery dungeon game, and that was released in the 90s, 1993 in fact. So the first mystery dungeon game was released in 1993. The first Shiren the Wanderer game was Mystery Dungeon 2, and that was released in 1995. These games were developed by a company called Chunsoft, which would later become Spike Chunsoft, and Chunsoft really made a big deal of this as its formula that it would start to apply to a lot of different games. When we look at something like Dynasty Warriors today, for example, Koei Tecmo has become very good at taking that base formula and applying it to a whole bunch of licenses. We've just seen Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity do a good job of that, and that is Koei Tecmo taking its formula and applying it to a property. Well, Chunsoft did the same thing. Shiren the Wanderer was Chunsoft's own game, but As we saw with Torneco's Great Adventure, it did it with Dragon Quest. It also had a series that was very popular called Chocobo's Dungeon. That started all the way back in the 90s, and that was again Chunsoft taking its Mystery Dungeon formula and applying it to a Final Fantasy character in that instance. And since then, we've also seen it expand out to Pokemon. So the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon came in 2005, and it's the same deal again. It was taking an existing property and applying the roguelike formula over the top of it. Since then, Chunsoft has become Spike Chunsoft. They continue to push this Mystery Dungeon formula where they can. There was an Etrian Odyssey Mystery Dungeon game not too long ago on the DS, and they've also experimented with some of their own spins on the formula. For example, Mystery Chronicle, One Way Heroics, which takes the basic idea of the Mystery Dungeon title or formula and then applies it to a slightly different context. But there have been dozens and dozens of games in the Mystery Dungeon series, and it really has become the iconic roguelike as such. So when you think about roguelikes being such an oversaturated genre, you can really trace the genre back as much to Mystery Dungeon as you can to the original Rogue itself, because an awful lot of roguelikes more or less copy the Mystery Dungeon formula to a T, rather than try to do what Rogue did. I think Rogue is a largely forgotten game within the game development space, and when people set out to make a roguelike, a traditional roguelike for example, they generally look at the Mystery Dungeon formula as the source of the inspiration for that. What frustrates me a little bit about the roguelike as a genre now is that so many indie developers have caught on to the term as a marketing gimmick that the word itself has lost all descriptive meaning. For three really good examples, consider Binding of Isaac, Hades, and FTL. All three have been written up as roguelikes because they use procedural level design, but none of them bear any resemblance whatsoever to one another, let alone the Mystery Dungeon games or Rogue itself. What this means is that when you say roguelike to somebody, they're not likely to have the clear image of what you're actually talking about. Other examples of roguelikes have been Rogue Legacy or even Othercide, with one being a platformer with random levels and the other being a tactics RPG with random levels, but neither of those have any resemblance whatsoever to, say, Shiren the Wanderer. And there's no guarantee that somebody who likes a Hades, an FTL, a Binding of Isaac, or an Othercide is going to like any of the other games that I've just listed, or Shiren itself, which means that the roguelike tag has lost all meaning or useful meaning as a genre indicator. Remember, the whole point of categorizing games as genres is so we can understand what a game that we haven't played is like based on games from the same genre that we have played. When somebody says platformer to you, you use the knowledge that you've had of the platformers that you've played in the past to fill in the gaps and get an understanding of what it might be like to play that game. A 2D platformer means a certain thing because you've played 2D platformers. A strategy game means a certain thing because you've played strategy games. The roguelike, however, means way too much, with the only point of similarity being randomization between these games. And that's not really helpful, because randomization is not what actually makes these games what they are. That's just a mechanic on the path to the themes and the other elements that the game displays. I would posit that a roguelike should be something more in the vision of Rogue. It should be either turn-based or very methodically paced, and while yes, it should have random level design, it should also feature a streamlined RPG system that the players use to overcome the challenges that it poses to them. It can't be too complex, because it's not about the complex mechanical systems. It's about a very kind of simple RPG system that players need to master in order to make progress through it. Now, I understand why indie developers like to categorize their games as roguelikes where they can, because the procedural elements mean that their games have unlimited content, and in an industry where content is king, being able to promise players an endless game is certainly a plus for the developers, but in the process they've really removed any value of the term, which is unfortunate, because then you get along to a game like Shiren the Wanderer, and people who otherwise enjoy roguelikes like Hades or FTL or whatever then start to play this and wonder what the fuss is about. But really, Shiren the Wanderer is the roguelike. It is the mystery dungeon game. It is the one, the epitome of the genre. And I do hope that players do check this one out with that in mind, because there is a lot that is of value to this game. It is very traditional in tone, but it is also very good in being traditional in tone. It has some warts because it comes from a system that is decades old at this point, but it's just done with such care and affection for the actual qualities of the roguelike genre that I think that people who go into it with an open mind will really enjoy it. Anyway, that's enough for this video. In other words, go and play Shiren the Wanderer. I think it's an excellent game. It's one of my favorites on the Switch for this year, and it comes right in time for Christmas, so you can get stuck into it over the holidays. Please do click that like and subscribe button if you enjoy my videos, that way you don't miss any, and please do consider backing me on Patreon as well for even $1 a month. You will support everything that I'm doing to try and grow this channel, the digitally downloaded website, and also the visual novels and things that we create as well. We're very busy people, so your support is most welcome. Otherwise, go play Shiren, have a good time, and we will see you at the next video.